Carl Jung had a disturbing observation about INFJs that most people don't want to hear. He believed that the very traits we celebrate in INFJs, their empathy, their desire to help others, their ability to see potential in everyone, could actually make them dangerous when left unawakened. Not dangerous to others, but dangerous to themselves and unconsciously manipulative to those around them. Here's the paradox Jung identified. Society's so-called healers often become the most unconscious manipulators. If you're an INFJ who feels constantly drained, invisible, and taken advantage of, Jung wouldn't call you a victim. He'd call you unawakened. And he had a brutal warning about what happens when you stay in that state. Today we're diving into Jung's most uncomfortable truths about the INFJ shadow and why your greatest strength might be your greatest prison. Before we start, please hit the like button, comment, and subscribe so you won't miss any of our weekly deep dives into the world of personality types. And if you're looking for a deeper understanding of yourself and your INFJ personality, browse our favorite INFJ products in the description, and click the link in the comments to take our favorite free personality test. The Saint Complex Trap. Most INFJs live in what Jung would call the Saint Complex, a psychological trap where you use your FE performance as armor against authentic self-expression. You've learned that being the helper, the listener, the one who always understands, gets you acceptance and keeps you safe from rejection. But here's what Jung understood that most INFJ content won't tell you. This constant people-pleasing isn't kindness. It's emotional protection. You're not being generous when you say yes to everything. You're being terrified of what happens if you say no. The exhausting cycle works like this. You sense what others need. You provide it before they even ask. You feel temporarily valuable. Then you resent them for not reciprocating the same energy. But you can't express that resentment because it would shatter your identity as the good person. So you stuff it down and do it all over again. Jung had a famous warning about this pattern. No tree grows to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. He meant that if you only show your light side, if you only express the socially acceptable parts of yourself, you're living half a life. The other half, your capacity for anger, selfishness, and personal power, doesn't disappear. It goes underground. The always nice INFJ is actually living in constant fear. Fear of conflict, fear of disappointing others, fear of being seen as selfish or mean. So you develop this performance where you're endlessly accommodating, where you anticipate everyone else's needs while completely ignoring your own. Real-world examples of this saint complex are everywhere in INFJ behavior. You're the one who always initiates plans, but never suggests what you actually want to do. You're the one who listens to everyone's problems, but never shares your own struggles. You're the one who gives thoughtful gifts, but feels hurt when others don't match your effort. You've probably convinced yourself this is just how you are, naturally giving, naturally selfless. But Jung would challenge that narrative. He'd say you're not naturally selfless. You're naturally terrified of your own selfish impulses. So you overcompensate by becoming a martyr. The hidden resentment building beneath this surface is what Jung called the shadow's revenge. Every time you say yes when you mean no, every time you smile when you're frustrated, every time you help someone who never helps you back, you're feeding a growing pool of unconscious anger. This anger doesn't stay hidden forever. It leaks out in passive-aggressive comments, in the famous INFJ door slam, in your attraction to toxic people who give you permission to feel angry on their behalf instead of acknowledging your own legitimate frustrations. Jung believed that the saint complex wasn't noble, it was cowardly. It's easier to be the perpetual helper than to risk being disliked for having boundaries. It's easier to focus on everyone else's problems than to face your own unmet needs. It's easier to be the victim of other people's selfishness than to own your own capacity for selfishness. The tragedy is that while you're busy performing sainthood, you're actually becoming exactly what you're trying not to be: manipulative. You're manipulating through martyrdom, through guilt, through the unspoken expectation that your sacrifices should be noticed and reciprocated. You're just doing it unconsciously, which makes it even more dangerous. This is Jung's first brutal warning. Your empathy without boundaries isn't a superpower. It's a prison you've built to avoid the uncomfortable work of being a whole person. The unintegrated shadow's revenge. So what happens when you spend years suppressing your anger, your selfishness, and your personal power? Jung had a clear answer. The shadow doesn't disappear. It finds other ways to express itself. And for INFJs, this usually shows up in ways you don't even recognize as shadow behavior. The INFJ door slam is the perfect example. Most INFJ content celebrates this as some kind of superpower, the ability to cut toxic people out of your life completely. But Jung would see the door slam for what it really is: shadow eruption. It's not strategic boundary setting. It's the explosive release of years of suppressed resentment. Think about it. The door slam doesn't happen after one bad interaction. It happens after months or years of you saying nothing, accommodating everything, and building up a reservoir of unexpressed anger. Then one day, something relatively small happens, and you completely cut the person off. No conversation, no attempt at resolution, just total elimination. This isn't healthy boundary setting. Healthy boundaries involve communication, negotiation, and gradual adjustments. The door slam is what happens when your shadow finally takes control because your conscious mind refused to deal with the problem earlier. But the shadow's revenge goes deeper than dramatic relationship endings. It shows up in passive-aggressive patterns that most INFJs don't recognize in themselves. You become the master of the guilt trip, disguised as selfless concern. You say things like, "Don't worry about me, I'll figure it out myself," when someone can't help you. But you say it in a way that makes them feel terrible. You develop what Jung called unconscious manipulation through martyrdom. You don't directly ask for what you need because that would feel too selfish. Instead, you create situations where others should naturally want to help you. And when they don't pick up on your subtle hints, you feel justified in your resentment. This is where Jung's concept of shadow projection becomes crucial for INFJs. When you refuse to own your capacity for selfishness, manipulation, and anger, you start seeing these traits everywhere else. You become a magnet for narcissists, users, and genuinely toxic people, because they're expressing the shadow traits you won't acknowledge in yourself. You might notice a pattern where toxic people keep appearing in your life. Jung would say this isn't bad luck or your empathetic nature attracting damaged people. It's your psyche trying to show you the parts of yourself you're refusing to see. The narcissist in your life is expressing the healthy selfishness you won't allow yourself. The manipulator is showing you the strategic thinking you only use for others, never for yourself. The unconscious manipulation through martyrdom becomes your primary relationship strategy, and you don't even realize you're doing it. You give and give and give, not from pure generosity, but from an unconscious contract that says, if I sacrifice enough, you'll eventually notice and take care of me the way I take care of you. When that contract inevitably gets broken because other people can't read your mind and don't know about agreements they never made, you feel betrayed. But instead of recognizing your role in creating unrealistic expectations, you retreat further into the saint complex. You tell yourself you're just too pure for this selfish world. Jung saw this pattern as incredibly dangerous because it creates what he called unconscious inflation. You start believing you're morally superior to others because you sacrifice so much. You develop a subtle arrogance disguised as humility. You become convinced that your way of being in the world, always giving, never receiving, is the enlightened path. But this supposed enlightenment is actually spiritual bypassing. You're using your empathy and self-sacrifice to avoid the difficult work of becoming a complete person. You're hiding behind your helper identity to avoid facing your own needs, desires, and yes, your own capacity for selfishness and manipulation. The shadow's revenge isn't just about occasional outbursts or passive-aggressive behavior. It's about living a half-life where you're constantly at war with parts of yourself that are actually essential for psychological health and authentic relationships. The Niti mental prison. But Jung identified another trap that's even more insidious for unawakened INFJs. the addiction to analysis over action. This is what happens when your dominant function, Ni, teams up with your tertiary function, Ti, to create what Jung would call a mental prison. Here's how this trap works. As an INFJ, you have this incredible ability to see patterns, to understand complex systems, to intuitively grasp how things connect. Your Ni is constantly processing information and generating insights about people, situations, and possibilities. It's genuinely brilliant. But when you're unawakened, when you're avoiding the uncomfortable work of shadow integration, you start using this analytical power as an escape from actually living your life. You become addicted to research, planning, and theoretical understanding because it feels productive without requiring you to take any real risks. Jung had a brutal assessment of this pattern. Insight without action is a disease. He understood that knowledge without implementation becomes a form of mental masturbation, intellectually satisfying, but ultimately sterile. Most INFJs know exactly what I'm talking about. You're the person who researches every possible angle before making a decision. You read every article, watch every video, analyze every perspective. You create elaborate plans and detailed strategies. You understand the psychology behind your problems better than most therapists. But then what happens? You get stuck in perfectionism paralysis. You convince yourself you need just a little more information, just one more perspective, just a slightly better plan before you can actually move forward. The fantasy becomes finding the perfect solution that will guarantee success without any risk of failure or rejection. This is your shadow avoiding responsibility, disguised as thoroughness. Because as long as you're still researching, still planning, still analyzing, you don't have to face the possibility of failing, being rejected, or discovering that you're not as special as you think you are. The NITI loop becomes your comfort zone because it gives you the illusion of progress without the vulnerability of actual progress. You can spend months analyzing why your relationships don't work instead of having one difficult conversation. You can research career changes for years instead of updating your resume. You can understand your psychological patterns perfectly while continuing to repeat them. Jung recognized this as a form of spiritual cowardice. The unawakened INFJ uses their intellectual gifts to avoid the messy, imperfect, trial and error process of actually building a life. You become so invested in understanding everything that you forget the point of understanding is to enable better action. The mental prison gets reinforced because every insight feels like an accomplishment. Every pattern you recognize, every connection you make, every psychological framework you master gives you a hit of satisfaction. Your brain rewards you for thinking about change, as if you've actually changed. But Jung understood that psychological insight without behavioral change is just sophisticated procrastination. You're not becoming more evolved by understanding your patterns. You're becoming more stuck by intellectualizing your stuckness. The tragedy is that your NI is actually designed to inform action, not replace it. Your intuitive insights are meant to guide you toward better choices, not become a substitute for making choices at all. When you get trapped in the analysis phase, you're actually betraying your own psychological gifts. This mental prison also serves the saint complex perfectly. As long as you're busy analyzing everyone else's problems and understanding complex psychological dynamics, you don't have to face the simple, uncomfortable truth that you're avoiding your own life out of fear. The solution isn't to stop analyzing. That would be like asking you to stop breathing. The solution is to recognize when your analysis has become avoidance. Jung believed that true psychological maturity meant learning to act on incomplete information, to move forward despite uncertainty, to choose progress over perfection. Breaking this cycle requires what Jung called the courage of imperfection, the willingness to take action based on good enough understanding rather than perfect comprehension. Because the truth is, you'll never have all the information you think you need. Life requires you to act, adjust, and learn through experience. The villain integration process. So how do you break free from these psychological traps? Jung's answer was radical and uncomfortable. You need to learn to be a villain. Not an actual villain, but you need to integrate the parts of yourself that you've labeled as bad or selfish. This is what Jung called individuation, becoming a whole person instead of just a good person. The first step is embracing your capacity for selfishness, and I mean that literally. Jung believed that healthy selfishness was essential for psychological development. You need to learn to prioritize your own needs without guilt, without elaborate justification, without making it about serving some higher purpose. This means learning to say no as a complete sentence. Not, "I'm sorry, I can't because." Not, "I wish I could help, but." Just, no. The unawakened INFJ thinks they need a valid reason to decline requests. The awakened INFJ understands that not wanting to do something is reason enough. Here's what this looks like in practice. When someone asks you to help them move, and you don't want to spend your Saturday lifting boxes, you say no. You don't invent a fake commitment. You don't offer to help them find someone else. You don't apologize for having boundaries. You just decline and let them figure out their own solution. The guilt you feel when you do this, that's your shadow trying to emerge. The part of you that's been suppressed for years is finally getting some air, and it feels uncomfortable because you've spent so long believing that your worth comes from your usefulness to others. Jung understood that INFJs needed to learn to use their strategic mind for themselves, not just for others. You're incredibly good at seeing what other people need and figuring out how to help them get it. But when it comes to your own life, you suddenly become passive and helpless. The villain integration means turning that same strategic intelligence toward your own goals. This might mean manipulating situations to your advantage, consciously and deliberately. If you want a promotion, you don't just hope your boss notices your good work. You strategically document your achievements. You time your conversations for maximum impact. You build alliances that support your advancement. You do the same political maneuvering that you've watched others do, except now you're doing it for yourself. Setting boundaries becomes shadow work practice, because every boundary forces you to choose yourself over someone else's comfort. When you tell your friend you're not available to listen to their relationship drama for the third time this week, you're practicing healthy selfishness. When you refuse to work late because your colleague didn't plan properly, you're integrating your capacity to let others face the consequences of their choices. The power of conscious manipulation versus unconscious patterns is crucial here. Remember, you were already manipulating, through martyrdom, through guilt, through creating situations where others should naturally want to help you. The difference is that now you're doing it consciously and directly, instead of unconsciously and passive-aggressively. Conscious manipulation might look like this. Instead of working yourself to exhaustion, hoping your boss will notice and give you a raise, you schedule a meeting and make your case directly. Instead of dropping hints that you'd like your partner to plan a romantic evening, you tell them exactly what you want and when you want it. This is why healthy INFJs need their villain era, a period where you deliberately practice behaviors that feel selfish, demanding, or aggressive. You're not becoming a bad person. You're becoming a complete person. You're learning to express your shadow consciously, instead of letting it leak out in destructive ways. Jung believed that until you could own your capacity for selfishness, manipulation, and power, you would remain at the mercy of these forces operating unconsciously. The goal isn't to become selfish all the time. It's to become capable of selfishness when the situation calls for it. The awakened INFJ doesn't avoid conflict. They engage in it strategically. They don't people please. They choose when to accommodate others based on their own values and goals. They don't wait to be rescued. They rescue themselves using whatever tools are necessary, including tools they previously considered wrong or bad. The awakened INFJ's strategic power. So what does integration actually look like in daily life? The awakened INFJ doesn't abandon their empathy or stop caring about others. Instead, they learn to use their FE consciously rather than compulsively. They choose when to engage their helper mode based on their own capacity and values, not from fear of rejection or need for validation. This means you can still be incredibly supportive and insightful, but now you're doing it from a place of genuine choice rather than unconscious compulsion. When a friend needs advice, you might say, I have 30 minutes to talk about this, and then I need to focus on my own projects. You're still helping, but you're also honoring your own limits.
The difference between service and servitude becomes crystal clear. Service comes from abundance. You give because you want to, and you're able to. Servitude comes from fear. You give because you're afraid of what happens if you don't. The awakened INFJ serves others without sacrificing themselves. Your relationships transform completely through shadow work because you stop attracting people who need you to be incomplete. When you own your capacity for selfishness and manipulation, you no longer need to find partners who express these traits for you. You start attracting people who appreciate your wholeness rather than exploit your wounds. You become comfortable with being misunderstood because you no longer need everyone's approval to feel valuable. Some people will call you selfish when you set boundaries. Others will be disappointed when you stop being their unpaid therapist. The awakened INFJ accepts this as the price of authenticity. Your strategic mind becomes a tool for building the life you actually want, instead of just solving everyone else's problems. You apply the same analytical brilliance to your career advancement, your relationship choices, your personal goals. You stop being the person who gives great advice, but lives a mediocre life. Jung's vision of the individuated INFJ was someone who could be both healer and warrior, both compassionate and ruthless, both selfless and selfish, depending on what the situation required. This isn't contradiction, it's completeness. You become psychologically flexible instead of stuck in one limited identity. The awakened INFJ becomes what Jung called a psychological architect, someone who can design and build authentic relationships, meaningful work, and a life that actually reflects their values rather than their fears. You stop waiting for permission to want what you want and start creating the conditions for getting it. This integration doesn't happen overnight. It requires consistent practice of behaviors that feel uncomfortable at first. But gradually, you discover that being whole feels infinitely better than being good. You realize that your shadow wasn't your enemy. It was your missing power. Your shadow isn't your enemy. It's your missing power. Start today by identifying one area where you're playing saint instead of being strategic. If you want to continue the journey to understanding yourself or an INFJ in your life, click either of the following videos, where we continue to unlock the secrets of the INFJ personality type.